Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. I'm Harriet Frew, eating disorder therapist, here to support you in overcoming disordered eating and finding peace with food. So today I want to talk about quotes to inspire you in eating disorder recovery. So on my own healing journey, I have regularly been inspired by quotations, finding these to be a wonderful reminder and uplifting presence when going through tough times, because it's so easy to drift from the healing path and to fall back into old ways of coping, because it's sometimes inevitable to lose sight of why you started in the first place and to lose motivation. So I tend to write my favourite quotes in my journal and then will refer to them regularly. And sometimes I will use them as reminders on my phone or place them in prominent places in my bedroom or workspace to orientate me back to the present when my mind has wandered off. So I'm going to share some of my favourite quotes with some personal anecdotes about each one and how these have helped me through some dark times. So I hope that you find some inspiration in this, and I wholeheartedly encourage you to seek out your own uplifting quotes, because I think, again, we are all individual and some voices, some quotes speak to us much more than others. Okay, so the first one I have is Michael Jordan. If you accept the expectations of others, especially negative ones, then you will never change the outcome. So I'll say that again. If you accept the expectations of others, especially negative ones, then you never will change the outcome. Now, this one is very close to my heart. You know, I was parented by a dad struggling with his mental health, with unhealed, complex trauma that was regularly projected out onto his family in volatile, angry words. And until the age of 22 years old, I absorbed these words like a sponge without question. Now, my dad had been relentlessly criticised and bullied himself, and his rage leaked out in his daily interactions. And I perceived him as a dangerous demon and an all-powerful influence in my life. You know, I really kind of had him up there sort of on a pedestal, really. I believed his words wholeheartedly. You know, he was my dad. I loved him. And I really believed there was something inherently wrong with me and that I was flawed and broken. So this ongoing judgment took its toll on my self-worth, and I found it really impossible to validate or believe in any of my strengths and qualities because I was so dependent on my dad's approval and acceptance to feel worthy. Now, this changed for me on my solo trip to Australia at the age of 23. I wrote to my dad and I expressed many of my unsaid thoughts and feelings in a heartfelt letter. So my dad took the time to respond and send a letter back to me, which I'm very grateful for. Now, he couldn't listen to me or validate me or understand my perspective. And I have to acknowledge, really, I found it very hard to listen to him and to truly acknowledge his version of events. But the written words, I guess, that he sent back to me as well were not soothing or encouraging in the way that I sought from a father figure. You know, I think when I wrote to him, I thought, I really wanted him to write back and to apologise and to accept his role in things and somehow to kind of rupture and repair it all. But what the letter did is it was like a black and white sort of handwritten letter which gave me some objectivity and evidence of my dad's life perspective. And I think when I read those words, I could now understand that he was a prisoner in his own cage. And sadly, he was impacted so much by his own trauma and difficult times. And his beliefs and worldview were outdated and distorted in relation to my life. Okay, and I'm not saying I think there's very valid reasons why he thought about things in that way because of the way he had grown up and been parented and the way he'd experienced life. But I was really able to see actually that perspective, those beliefs were not relevant for me. So I was able to stand back and for the very first time and to realise that these words were his pain and process. It was not about me. Now, this was not a miracle moment of shedding the past in one go and moving into the land of unicorns and healing and that everything was perfect. But it was a stepping stone to greater freedom. I realise now that my dad's words did not define me and I could choose to validate myself. And I could let go of these expectations and judgments and begin to define my life through my own lens. Okay, my next quote. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. Alice Walker. Say that again. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking that they don't have any. Alice Walker. So in my early days of eating disorder struggles, I felt like a desperate victim. I felt powerless to change and blamed the people in my life for my reality. I was quick to judge and outsource the blame to anyone and everyone but myself. And I felt that change was only possible if external circumstances changed. I needed the right therapist. I needed my parents to accept me and to support my journey. I needed the validation from outside that I was okay and worthy to move forward. But in Australia, I began to take responsibility for my life and to realise that I could define my own destiny. I recognised that no one else outside of me had the power or control to fix me or make it all okay. Now, this can feel a bit scary and overwhelming, but it's also very empowering when we can take responsibility. So yes, I could be supported and accept appropriate help to heal. Yes, I could reach out to friends and share emotional difficulties without doing it all on my own. But the power was in me, it was within me, and I felt the surge of energy bubbling up inside me like an erupting volcano, and it felt good. So this leads me on to my almost favourite quote of all time, and this is by Albert Camus. I think that's how you say his name. And he says, "In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer, and that makes me happy, for it says that no matter how hard the world pushes against me, within me, there's something stronger, something better pushing right back." So I'm going to read that again. "In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer, and that makes me happy, for it says that no matter how hard the world pushes against me, within me there's something stronger, something better pushing right back." Now, these days, I am mostly grateful for my upbringing and the harsh times that I experienced. And if I'd had a smoother ride earlier in life, it's unlikely that I would have trained as a therapist or created a podcast or worked with so many wonderful clients. And a straightforward path would have allowed me more joy and freedom for sure, with less self-responsibility or over-caretaking of others. However, the turbulent times forced me to dig deep and to focus on my purpose and passion from a young age, as I didn't have the support when I needed it, and I was vulnerable and struggling out in the world alone. But this pushed me to dig deep and to access my own resources and internal resilience. Now, I'm aware as well that I have had some difficult times, but I'm aware that I still have a great deal of privilege in my life. And I'm very aware that I was very fortunate that my very early years, I think my first year of my life particularly, I had very, very close bonding and connection with my grandparents and my mum. So my baseline nervous system is, I believe, rooted in safe connection, in oxytocin. My baseline world felt safe to me, although sometimes precarious and difficult. So this meant that I did have some internal resources to lean on. I lent into these resources in those difficult times, and I realised my own internal efficacy to change and what was possible. Now, if your very early years were very unsafe and your nervous system is wired in fight and flight, these changes that I'm talking about can feel scary and overwhelming, and you probably will have to do more work to really learn to calm your nervous system and to feel safe in the world. But be kind and compassionate to yourself, because change is always possible. The next quote: "It does not matter how slowly you go as long as you do not stop." And this is by Confucius. I probably said that wrong. It does not matter how slowly you go as long as you do not stop. Now, I always believed I would recover from bulimia. I don't know why, but for some reason I saw it as a temporary situation that I would emerge from freely. And I think it helped that I had a deep purpose and desire to train as a therapist from a young age, and I knew that I needed to be fully healed to support others and be authentic. Now, this kept me going time and time again. Even when I hit roadblocks, I would pick myself up repeatedly. And it was a messy, complicated journey where the outcome was never certain. But I believed that I was going to recover. And I trusted this thought 100%, and it kept me going. So believe that you can too, because our thoughts are so, so powerful. Okay, next quote. "If you can quit for a day, you can quit for a lifetime." This is by Benjamin Allier Sons. I think, again, I probably really pronounced that really wrongly. So if you can quit for a day, you can quit for a lifetime. So my journey to stop purging food had its ups and downs. I could muscle through with stark willpower for about 10 days without a purge, but then would tip over the abyss into the murky depths of the destructive cycle again. But slowly, ever so slowly, I began to gather momentum with change. Now, once I sustained greater momentum, but then broke it, the drama of falling backwards felt even more intense. So when I hadn't relapsed for a while, I felt compelled to keep going. So if I'd gone 15 days, then I needed to keep this up. So I would toy with the temptation to purge regularly. But I knew that one episode could lead to many. It was almost like once I'd opened that trapdoor, it would be a slippery slope down. One little blip could plummet me from the bungee platform into headlong bulimia for days. And it wasn't just the purging act itself. It was the colossal impact on self-worth and confidence too. So it's almost like that one incident would just be a whole unraveling of everything. So little by little, the time between purges grew longer until I purged for the very last time many years ago. So this is not to say that I was fully healed once this behaviour stopped. I continued to binge and restrict sometimes, but it was a significant watershed moment on the healing road. Okay, next quote. Life is like riding a bicycle. To keep your balance, you must keep moving. Albert Einstein. So it's easy to get stuck in eating disorder recovery. You can take a few steps forward and then become stagnant with change, rearranging the deck chairs on the sinking Titanic in a desperate attempt to feel that you're doing something. You're in fact, though, circling around the same old issues. Recovery does not need to be bold or loud or blasting fanfares from the rooftops. However, it needs to be rooted in a quiet, determined and continual stepping forward, taking one step at a time. So no perfection, no ideal time frame, but a steady, incremental shift forward and a deep knowing that you will get there. And if you really engage with that belief wholeheartedly, just really think, no perfection, no ideal time frame. I'm taking steady, incremental shifts forward, and I know that I will get there. It will help you to keep taking the next step. So I hope you found this helpful. Do share with me any of your own quotes that have been particularly profound or particularly inspired you, or if any of these ones here really resonate with you. I know it's a very personal thing here, which ones stand out and which ones don't. Thank you so much for listening today. If you're not following me already on Instagram, do seek me out at the Eating Disorder Therapist _. For further support with your relationship with food, do go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. And if you enjoy this podcast, I would be so grateful if you'd follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. Thank you so much for listening today, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.